Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
We are going to be talking about the Jordan Peele movie from 2019, Us. And to help us, we have brought on two guests, Boston and Jay from the podcast Race Trader. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
So, can you tell our listeners a bit about Race Trader, how it started, who you guys are, and what you cover?
Good job on the name, by the way.
It's my favorite podcast name. It really is. That's Trader, Trader, for those listeners.
Yeah, Boston, why don't you take it up with starting with the name explanation?
So we had a myriad of names that we tried for Race Trader, and they were either taken or they just didn't fit. And I think when we were thinking about the name Race Trader, it is two guys from different backgrounds, one being white, which is Jay.
Hello.
One being African American, which is myself, giving commentary on film that would be typically Black. So, I mean, that's it. It really sums up the premise of the podcast. The idea really came from listening to other movie reviews from other podcasts and other film, and really just, not finding the correct podcast that I felt like, or that we felt like, encapsulated Black film in a way that was a more cerebral critique. Did I capture that right, Jay?
Yeah, and I also think that when you talked to me, it was after, I don't know, like a hour-long conversation that was just a continuation of what we've been talking about since meeting, just on socioeconomic, racial discussion and things that we're really interested in, but we're coming from two different experiences, white and Black, and seeing how those things meet. In terms of podcast, I was super inspired by you guys, Scary Thoughts, in terms of organic conversation, not trying to make it funny when I can't speak for you two, but I think I have a good sense of humor, but I'm not a comedian, so I'm not going to try and punch things up. It doesn't work that way for me. And I kind of took a lot from the tone and pace of how you guys hash things out and always got something out of it. It felt really akin to the conversations, that I have with Boston and my other friends. And then the other podcast, in terms of race, where I was super inspired by, was The Champs with Neil Brennan and Moshe Kasher, where it was just two white dudes on the hipster level, one of them having the writer cred working with Chappelle, just talking with people of color and just having really unhinged dialogues about race. And it was very endearing, and I learned a lot from it as well. So I wanted to kind of continue that and add to it.
That's great.
Yeah, Neil Brennan is great, man. He has this bit about that I really related to, which is the reason why he gets along with Black people really well is they could just tell he just doesn't give a fuck and wants to die.
Yeah, that was in Three Mics, yeah.
Yeah, I totally relate to
that. Well, I love Race Trader. I think it's a great podcast. I love what you guys are on to. And I find when I listen, there are several times an episode where I go holy shit, I never thought of it that way, and not to be arrogant, but that doesn't happen to me when listening to even most of my favorite podcasts that often. So, thanks for those moments.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That means a lot. Yeah.
That does.
I felt like you guys went a little hard on Tyler Perry, though, who I love.
Well, I love your love of him. But I also didn't want to be patronizing either. Not that you are, but I was just being honest and I didn't connect with it. And it might've been specifically the movie. You started with a different film of his. So I haven't, which I actually still haven't seen. I just listened to your episode to hear your take on it. But yeah, no, we were a little hard.
Yeah, I think all the complaints that you guys have are legit complaints. You look at put that movie up against I don't know, a David Lynch movie or something, and you can see what's going on. But I'm more of a fan of him than I am his films, which is kind of how I feel about Jordan Peele.
That's interesting. I don't want to go off on a tangent too much about Medea or Tyler Perry, but Jay and I talk all the time. One of my favorite George W. Bush quotes, the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I think that if he were not Black that he wouldn't be making movies. And that's the thing that I think a lot of African Americans have trouble with. And I can say that probably as a Black man, but like his movies are for a subset of people that are very deeply religious and maybe would be, I don't know if anybody's super Christian has ever seen the movies, the Left Behind series or something like that. Like it would be those type of movies that would never have made it onto the big screen, or
Like the
maybe
black,
just
yeah,
like a Lifetime type movie. It
the black
wouldn't
Kirk
be
Cameron.
exactly.
Mm.
There you go.
Oh yeah, I
And
totally agree. Yeah, I definitely agree, and I do root for him a lot because he's from New Orleans too. So like, there's definitely an element of that. But I would say though, like Jordan Peele, he's found his nerd audience in a very similar way, and like I root for him, man. And I will say I like all of Jordan Peele's movies way more than I like Tyler Perry's movies, just for the record here.
I hope so.
I mean, I really like them. I like them quite a bit.
How did you guys feel about Us compared to Get Out? I don't know if that's a good place to start.
Probably a good place to start. But really quick, just for our audience, just two little caveats before we get into the meat of the matter. Want to apologize for some of the audio quality because this is COVID era and we're doing this over Zoom. And of course, spoilers ahead for the movie Us and probably Get Out because we're already talking about it.
Yeah.
It's just such a natural thing, you know, when a band has an incredibly blockbuster first album, the second album is always compared to the second. And it's hard not to, when we're talking about some sort of auteur filmmaker, to compare the second film to the first, like right up front. And so I think that's a completely fair question. I think that for me, Get Out is like this perfect little film, and Us is this big, epic, very flawed film.
Mm.
I love them both, but I really love Get Out. Us, I think, is rife with problems, despite its many qualities.
Yeah, I think Get Out's well, one, it's a funnier movie, so I'm going to naturally like that a little bit more. I think it's also a little bit more original than Us, and like part of that has to do with the Easter eggification of Us, and a lot of the choices that are like homages are just really, really heavy-handed. Even though I happen to love all of them, I was delighted by each of them, but I don't think they add up to a better film.
Huh.
Yeah, what about you guys?
Upon first impression and like feeling, I'm more taken by a movie like Us. I had a great experience with Get Out. I really don't have any criticisms, except in terms of like really personal taste, where it's so direct. And if I like, I'm really fishing for a criticism here, but maybe like so on the nose to me, where there wasn't enough immersion for me to like want to dive in and dig. And although all the criticisms you just very quickly said about Us, I totally see, but this movie invites me to immerse myself in it more, which I really enjoyed.
And I have been in love with Lupita, who's the lead character, the lead female character. I can't remember her name in the film.
Adelaide.
Adelaide.
and Red.
Yeah, I've been in love with Lupita for a long time. I mean, she first appeared to me, and like I know this is like completely anecdotal and not really at all analytical. And I thought that it was a different kind of horror film. I'm not like, one of the things that Jay and I go back and forth about is the challenge of him getting me up to speed on a lot of horror. So I'm not a huge horror person. I do not profess to have any expertise in the matter, but there was something strangely attractive about this movie outside of even Lupita. I thought like the way that they crafted it as a very middle class Black family just going on a trip. He goes to Howard, which is an HBCU, which is Jordan Peele making a statement about what kind of family this is. This is a very normal Black family with just doing regular things. And you don't for a second, and if you're not looking for the cues, even realize that they're Black. And part of the thing that Jay and I go back and forth on our podcast about is a lot of the movies that are about Black people are very dark movies. Now, don't get me wrong, Us is a very dark movie, but it's not because the characters are Black. It's just a dark movie.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I enjoyed about it. A fascinating thing that happened is when the dad goes out to kind of put his foot down with the doppelganger family, he uses an urban Black voice.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up. This is such a good point.
Like, he uses an urban Black voice to be scarier, which is hilarious. So like, there's so many little things in it that Jordan Peele does to say, hey, this is a new normal. This is going to be a new normal in the way that horror film is made with Black people in it. So I that's what I enjoyed most about the film.
I totally agree. I think the family is the best thing about this movie, and to me, it's an analog to the Freelings, which is the family from Poltergeist. And the reason why Poltergeist works so great is because the family is wonderful. The dad is great. The mom is the hero, and she's very loving. There's a weird little brother. The sister is strong in her own way and independent. I mean, it's like, I think, really closely tied to that. And then in interviews, Jordan Peele is like, I just want to see Black people going to the beach and owning a boat. And it's fucking rad, because it's like, it sounds so simple, but it's a really, really kind of radical film choice.
I totally agree.
And in one way, maybe one of the few ways it does address race or use race as a voice, I guess, in this film, is that the white couple, which, you know, I want to talk about Tim Heidecker's casting, but with Elizabeth Moss and Heidecker, like, they're so detached.
Mm-hmm.
And because of their detachment, and Tim Heidecker kind of like playing to his irony, which he's, you know, doubled down on his entire career, the whole family gets killed in like a moment, while the Black family like sticks together, is really resourceful and does a good job with all of that.
Yeah, I think it's also that the evil just sort of appears and dispatches the white family, whereas our heroes immediately sense something's going wrong and start to deal with it. They don't deal with it well at first, like going and confronting it with a baseball bat and posturing. It's not exactly what works. But yes, they immediately band together and figure out how they're going to overcome this obstacle, which their friends have. They're rich friends. They're clearly more class-blessed friends kind of can't deal with.
With that whole dinghy boat. Oh, you didn't get a flash gun, or
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit more about horror films and the history of African American horror films and African Americans in horror films. You know, obviously, with Get Out, the subject has come up in pop culture more than it had in a long, long time. And then documentaries and books like Horror Noir came out, and the whole idea of the social thriller was introduced by Jordan Peele. What do you guys think of how Us plays into that history or comes out of that history?
I mean, it's tough because I don't necessarily know that there's a huge genre of African American horror films. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, the only one that I can, and I talked to my wife about this, the only real horror films that I remember was like Candyman,
Yep.
which Jordan Peele is doing a remake of.
Yeah.
And I don't recall many, and maybe I'm not, like I said, I am not well versed in the horror genre. And one of my best friends, I came up with this theory of maybe why. And it's largely because, like, one of the films that was so scary that's Black that I couldn't finish watching on Netflix was the Central Park 5.
Mm.
And that's Black horror.
Sure.
Black horror is Rosewood. Black horror is the Central Park 5. Black horror is any movie, any period piece about slavery or the civil rights movement. I mean, even up to date in Lovecraft Country, like the real horror of Lovecraft Country is racism.
Yep.
Yeah, none of the horror in Lovecraft Country is scary at all, but that sundown town chase is fucking.
Yep.
Yes, it's terrifying and all based in reality. Whenever I watch a movie like one that I don't think is very good, that so I wouldn't even really recommend watching it, but I did watch it was Just Mercy with Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx, and I think about just because I'm black spending life in prison.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's terrifying. That's like, you know how like Blair Witch was scary, at least for me, only because I didn't know it wasn't real. Like it's that kind of horror that grabs you because you know it's possible.
Right.
And that is in essence like what black horror. And then I think there's just like Jay and I go back and forth about this. I kind of tongue in cheek. I don't know if other black people would find it believable, some of the stuff that actually happens in horror films. So Candyman is very believable for black people because black people are very spiritual, and on average, like most black people are very spiritual, and they would believe that a monster would come out if they summoned him by saying these things. But most black people aren't going into the woods, you know, like that's just not like a thing to do. And that's not to say that all black people don't, but on average, like they're not going into the woods. They're not really doing anything scary. And that's what makes Jordan Peele's movie so remarkable, is that for the most part, like you can see a black person doing it.
He's also referencing like the thing to do when I was living in New Orleans is like if there was a horror movie, you wanted to go see it at a black theater because like the audience was like way more fun to see it. Like people would be, and all those like Eddie Murphy joke ways, like it was just more fun. People would just like interact with the films, and those types of films that we would see are the types of films that Jordan Peele is referencing. You know, like he's like into the shit that I'm into, which is like mid '80s horror, like not like Mark likes all this like fancy pants lesbian shit from the '60s, but
It's the
like
best.
the you know the Jordan Peele horror comedy thing, it's like I think it has like the broadest appeal to people who are like Gen X and people who grew up with hip hop and like the Wu-Tang Clan and stuff like that. So I think it all kind of merges together, and you think about like the history of like how cinema was really important to hip hop in New York. I think you do get a little bit of a blend there, but there's really not that many like great black horror movies like from that time. There's good characters, but there's not great like full cast movies.
Sorry, that time being when?
Like the '80s, basically.
Oh, the 80s for sure. Yes.
You see a lot of like these like really, you know, the heavy metal boom, the horror boom,
Yep.
you know, all that shit, like the satanic panics going on. I've always been curious, like what the black experience during the satanic panic was, you know, like because I know like what it was like at Catholic school, but you know, were black churches in the South worried about satanic cults the same way?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
Absolutely not.
because you guys don't have
They
like
don't.
trench coat mafia dudes running around, right?
No, because we have the police.
Yeah.
Well, that thing,
You know,
that thing also, like the Satanic Panic, feels particularly like I see. I grew up fundamentalist Christian, so I'm well versed in like I don't know if you ever heard of is it James Dobson? Focus on the Family.
I wrote him a letter once.
Oh, it's fantastic. There's like Bill Gothard and all of this like crazy like homeschool culty stuff.
Yeah.
And they really spread it. And you know, much to our parents' chagrin, who are both like wonderful people who we have good relationships with. But my brother's like the biggest Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering kid, and I'm like the biggest Black Sabbath fan. So it's just like,
Yep.
you know, it happens. But going back to the history of horror, the earliest knowledge that I could pull, and it's a thin one, but is the Night of the Living Dead, and the way that Romero just, I think the story goes like organically, he just cast a black dude, and
He was the best one who showed up for the audition.
right,
Yeah.
and he survived past the, you know, the trope of the black guy always dying that's been referenced to death in like Scream and things of that nature. But yeah, and I would say to Boston's point about the black experience has enough horror, I think that makes sense, obviously. And I think, you know, Mark and Chad, you guys have mentioned as like horror movies are like this memento mori, this reminder, this kind of like, it's like a form of church in a way. You're watching these horror movies as a way to like catch up on survival skills, see some good kills, know that you're going to die too. And if your experience through life is already dealing with that on a regular day basis, what's the point? To push back, though, a little on what Boston's saying, the other thing about horror is that it is for a small minority of white people. Like, there are plenty of white people who can't stand or stomach horror. And I think now that Black people are finally getting more and more of a voice with all of the unfortunate pushback we get, you're starting to see the breakdown of the Black monolith, and where like Jordan Peele's now allowed to be the weirdo that, us white people are.
Yeah, some of what you guys are talking about reminds me a little bit of this book Darkly by Leela Taylor. It's called Darkly, The Black History and America's Gothic Soul. And the book is, she's basically this Black woman who grew up goth. It's sort of memoir-ish, but about the tension in that complicated identity for her. And she poses these questions about, well, what's more goth than being Black? And simultaneously, what's more Black than being goth? So while people of color have been grotesquely underrepresented in the history of horror films, especially in any positive or powerful light, and that has been changing, there are a lot of, in particular, Black voices who have been saying, well, lots of us have always been into horror movies. We're just only starting to see ourselves in them, but we've always been in the audience,
Yes, and I'd agree with that. Like, I grew up on Freddy Krueger and Jason and Halloween, and I don't know if I've been as deeply embedded into the genre outside of the major commercial movies, Child Play or something like that. Those have always been around my community, of people, and are very familiar to most African Americans. I know African Americans aren't a monolith, but most people would be familiar with those. The trick is, Black people are such a subculture that's complex, and within that subculture, there is a natural fear of things that are unusual. And Jay and I had this conversation in the Teddy Perkins episode of our podcast. When we asked the question, when would be the first time you'd turn around? And we got deeper into it, and Jay said something like, he met a guy on Craigslist and he went down to pick up a record player or something. He went down in the basement to listen to the record player.
Okay. Whoa.
Like, that's yeah, like, like a Black person would never do that.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying like all Black people, but 99% of Black people aren't doing that. Like, they're afraid of everything. Like, so
it was a basement.
Yeah, it was a basement. Like, that's what Jordan Peele gets so right, is that's the thing about Get Out, because it is, and even though like in the back of the mind, and we're not talking about Get Out, but it's a good example that any Black person is going to tell you, don't go see your white girlfriend's family out in the woods. That's a bad idea. And there's things about it that, even though we know that the Black guy would probably go because he wants to, feel comfortable, but there are just so many rules and things that you're not supposed to do to be safe, that a lot of horror films don't work, except Jordan Peele's, because they kind of take us out of that, maybe it's true, maybe this could actually happen kind of thing. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it gives like that cultural lens, gives those characters, like what I always say, like Cormac McCarthy characters are just competent up against struggle. And it's just that this level of competence that you only ever really used to see in horror movies in like the final girls. Like the final girls have like sort of that level of confidence, but everybody else dies. But then in like Get Out, you have like all kinds of rad knowing characters. You have like Lil Rel is basically the heart of that movie. Like he's so fucking good, and he's like speaking for the audience the whole time. That's the one thing I wish this movie wish us had a little bit more of, was a little bit more of that. But I guess like Us is more about class than race. So
I
Yeah.
Well,
agree.
I think that something you guys are touching on that makes me think of a way that I don't want to say is unsuccessful, but something that I think limits its strength a little is that in Get Out, as you guys were just saying, there are these rules, and this guy breaks the rule, and there are serious consequences to it.
Mhm.
And Get Out is addressing, in a fantasy realm, a very real fear. And something we talk about on Scary Thoughts a lot is this idea of collective dread, the what fear is a horror film addressing that's oftentimes very in the air in the time that it is made. And this film is sort of a siege film, sort of a home invasion film, but ultimately it's like a doppelganger aligned horror movie like Plus One or Coherence or Black Swan or The Tenant or Enemy. You know, there are all these doppelganger. But I don't know that even though the film addresses things like class and race and the legacy of America and things like that, the greater horror that it's sort of contained within is this idea of the doppelganger, which abstractly can be horrifying, but I don't know that that is like as I'm framing it, a collective dread. I don't know that I have an active fear of being replaced.
Ooh, I have a theory for this. Sorry, go ahead.
So do I. You go first,
Good.
Jeff.
Okay, so my theory, I'm really stoked on because I haven't seen anybody else talk about it. And I think this movie is about black bourgeois guilt because Adelaide, she's from the underworld, right? She gets out. She is successful. She has this successful life.
Oh.
She doesn't go
That's
back to
deep.
free her people. She doesn't, and instead what happens is this person who's lost their social status, Red, or however you want to say him, but the girl who goes back under, she sort of represents like almost this like white Trump voter, this person who's downslid into like a bad spot and then rises up with anger. And so I think it's about like the fear of like not going back and uplifting your people. And what's really interesting about this is Jordan Peele is like on a mission to go out and help young black filmmakers. So I think he's like answering this fear for himself. And so that's kind of like what I think the anxiety at the heart of this film is. And it comes out at the M. Night Shyamalan end, but I think that's what it's about.
I totally want to hear what you also wanted to say, Jay, but I think that although I totally see what you're saying, I don't know that that is like a visceral, like an active fear the way someone wielding a butcher knife is a fear, right?
Yeah, that's what the scissors are for.
That someone's going to kidnap you. No, I know. But I'm saying a part of my frustration with this movie is it leans heavily on the allegorical, and I think that takes us out of these very real, palpable fears that it is addressing in the first 2/3. But these sort of like conceptually abstracted horrors, I think, are less visceral and less effective.
Maybe, but I think that abstraction that you're speaking to is what compels me, at least, to dive into it. Like what I was about to say is adjacent to what Chad just said, in that we started out with this podcast saying how this movie doesn't really address race, but now that I was thinking, and as you guys were talking all this, it's just the whole thing in a way. It's almost Peele's like repurposing of the doppelganger as something that has been forgotten. And like socioeconomically, Black people as the 14% of America have been forgotten and left to rot. I don't think it's an accident that the underworld, which, a lot of Kubrickian nods to it, especially when Adelaide is walking around with the axe, like Jack Torrance. But, you have that whole underworld looks like government cheese, like prison, like everything's beige outside of the rabbits. But like, I don't know, this forgotten class. I think that's a very big racial component.
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought about it the way that Chad just said it, and I can tell you that it's not like the guilt of leaving your community behind as you enter the bourgeois is not something that is lost on any Black person that I know, that has made it from the more difficult parts of being Black. You know, I never really connected those things. So I think that's an incredible allegory to not horror necessarily, but what he might have been feeling as he's shifting through and growing as a director and a producer. I mean, when I think about Adelaide's character, because Lupita's a great actress, and part of what she does throughout the film is she's just a little off. Even when she's snapping her fingers
Yeah.
with her son, and everything's just a little off. So she's never very comfortable in her skin.
She was so offbeat. I was like, wait, is she right? Or I'm like extra white in like the
No,
movie?
I think because she had to come from the underworld and assimilate, she just never got it. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, at the same time, she's constantly looking over her back and constantly paranoid about what might happen, because she has what people of every race probably have, is imposter syndrome. You know, like, and I think that's a part of it, but I never really tried. That was excellent. I never really thought of it in a way that she might be just, you know, there might be some guilt there that she's escaped and left her community. And her doppelganger, who was down below, says it. You never came back to get me, or we could have went out together and you left me here.
Mm-hmm.
And she never really addresses that.
Yeah, like she's so great. I mean, she's great in both roles, but like she's creepy as fuck as Red. You know, like with her voice from having her larynx crushed when she was a little girl, like all that stuff is so rad. And then like Jordan Peele's like, he's giving the world like a really simple, awesome Halloween costume. Like that jumpsuit with scissors and the glove is like $80. I mean, there's so many things he's done that like make this like an all-time classic, and that's no like mean feat, you know. Like the t-shirt exposition in this movie is excellent.
Yep.
You know, like he's wearing the Jaws shirt from the beach. The, like you mentioned, the Howard University shirt is such a great touch. Like the little girl has the rabbit on her shirt, so she's like a rabbit. And
The
then
two black flag shirts.
Black flag shirt.
Yes.
So what's so great about the black flag shirts is the first time that it appears, it's the one where it's the My War shirt. And he's holding like the knife, so it's like, you know, it's kind of like a foreshadowing, but it's worn by like a punk rocker in the 80s. So that's like a low status person. And then in the modern time, it's an Abercrombie version of that black flag, or not Abercrombie. What's the other fucking store?
Urban Outfitters.
Yeah, it's the Urban Outfitter version of that shirt. And it's like this weird like class reversal, and it's mirrored. I mean, there's just, and then later on that happens with the Thriller shirt and the Hands Across America shirt. And I think all that is like totally like room 237, like Kubrick theories at work. You know, like where like the little kids were in the Apollo shirt. So obviously Kubrick faked the moon landing, but it's interesting that he's like used like shirts as like this like Easter egg. Like, I mean, it's like more Easter eggs than like a church meetup, but you know,
that's funny. But I'll say this: it is not it's not a rewatchable horror film. Once you get all the Easter eggs, like it does, I'd have to say it does become relatively boring. Like it doesn't reach out and grab you the way that Get Out does. I love what it does for, like I said, I love the way that Jordan does the race thing, integrating them and making you feel like they're somewhat normal without their race being on prominent display. They're just a family. The dad's kind of the goofy dad who's kind of can't get right, almost like a sitcom dad. And it's just kind of very funny and goofy. And then horror, there's a slasher perspective to it. But would I recommend this to somebody who wasn't really into horror, or would I recommend this even to like a person who's just looking for a good movie? Probably not.
That's surprising. Go on.
Yeah, I might actually, just because it's so low grade, and it has like some scary moments. You know, like when the doppelgangers are first standing outside, that's like a great creepy moment.
That's horrifying.
Yeah. And really, Lupita Nyong'o's performance is like shattering.
Hmm.
Like, I would absolutely recommend this film. Just everybody kills it in this movie. I love everybody's performances in very different ways. But I think this movie is sort of like worth watching to get to see her do her thing.
And that little goblin boy, when he's running around on his arms and legs, is fucking creepy
Awesome.
shit.
And that mask seems like a nod to The Strangers. I don't know if that was intentional or not. But in terms of home invasion, yeah, that is a scary movie. But there's moments that felt similar to The Strangers, how they just like stood there. But I feel differently in that, yeah, I could rewatch this movie over and over. I do think it's because I'm just a fan of horror, but also because I think the shots are more interesting. And
it's so well composed, for sure.
Well, I just love like how the movie opens with a reflection, kind of. I think it's like, it has the bunnies and all of like the kind of structuring first, but once you see her watching the commercial, you see her reflection in a television. You don't see her.
Yeah, and it's like the audience's reflection too, kind of. So it's like a really neat little like double nod.
Yeah.
I think that what this movie most reminds me of is like a Peter Greenaway movie, like A Cook Thief, His Wife and Her Lover, or something like that, where you have these incredible actors giving these amazing performances, but you're almost slightly removed in some senses from it. It's also very composed and there's so much detail. And if you rewatch it, you pick up on more little details, things that are thrown into the mise en scène that you can pick up on an hour later and things like that. But there is this little bit that, because it's so hyper composed, leaves you slightly cold. And Kubrick does that as well.
That's true.
You've got these characters like sweating and crying and bleeding and running around and fearing for their lives. And you're drawn in because the performances are so good, but the film itself doesn't feel maybe as visceral as the performances of the actors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's like Jordan Peele's like tied this movie up a little too tight. Like I've been on this like David Lynch spirit quest all month, and I was watching an interview with him, and an audience member asked him, well, what do you think when people say your movies don't make any sense, or there's these moments that like have no explanation? He says, well, those are the moments that the audience gets to expand their intuition and dream. Like this whole movie's laid out for like there's not anything that is not without explanation in this film, or like a really obvious like Easter egg. And I think that limits where the audience can go a little bit. Like if he had simply like cut out the whole part explaining how it was a government experiment and it was this weird underground thing that happened and you never understood, this movie would be like 20% better.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a very confusing thing for me because, especially again, referring to Get Out, which had so little exposition, it showed you almost everything, or all the exposition was in conversation. And this movie has these two very long exposition dumps that actually are not that interesting. It kind of convolutes the movie. And I don't know, like exposition dumps are, speaking of tropes, this movie is very self-aware, and Jordan Peele, like, he's so clearly gets the minutia of cinema, but he's got these two exposition dumps, which anybody will tell you is what you don't do in a movie. And I think that they burden the film. They burden the third act.
Yes, I don't mind the first one as much because it's still odd. You wonder, why the fuck were they eating rabbits? Like, you wonder a few things, and it's very, that exposition actually is like, it's very visceral. But I totally agree with that second one. It's just you gave away the goose that was laying all your eggs. Like, it's frustrating. Yeah.
Easter eggs.
yeah.
What do you guys think about the music, specifically the whole "I Got Five on It" thing? Like, there was this one neat little thing I ran across, which is like the dude that wrote the hook in that song was never paid for it. So I don't know if that's intentional, but it's like almost like the work of this creative underclass being robbed. But like, it was interesting choice. Like that song was playing in clubs when I was working in clubs a lot, and it's clearly about drugs, despite what the father says.
The I Got Five on it was a throwback because I think I was in middle school when the I Got Five on it came out, and I didn't draw that connection that it might be, but I thought what was clearly like a middle finger to the yuppie class is her using Ophelia, whatever, to call the police, and she gets to fuck the police.
Yeah.
Like that's clearly was clearly a fuck you to white privilege in some regard. Like these technologies, these things that you barricade yourself around to keep you safe, can't keep you safe when you need it the most. And in fact, what you get is in calling the police is the same thing Black people have almost gotten all the time when they call the police. So I thought that was a little bit of irony when I was listening to that. The I Got Five on it, I couldn't place it. I just thought it was great to hear it. Like in that world or whatever, I thought it was pretty cool, but I didn't really draw any conclusions from it.
Well, the slow down version at the end wasn't even done until like way late into audience screenings, which I thought was kind of interesting. It seems like there's this late creative decision to amplify the song in the movie, and it's the one element that isn't really just explained to death on the internet. Like it just seems to be there. Like, is it making some commentary on drugs? I don't know. I mean, I got nothing for that.
The thing I kind of liked about what they did with the song is that it became this weird leitmotif that runs through the film where, yeah, it's reproduced. There are these, they're sort of covers, but they're really twisted and distended, and they're almost these like hauntological takes on that song.
Mm.
And in the preview for it as well, they use it. And it sort of reminds me, of in Inception, where they listen to Je ne regrette rien, and then if you go one level down and it plays, it's at like quarter speed, and then if you go one more level down, it just becomes this low end warble, but it's still the same song, and it just becomes this creepy texture. And I feel like that's sort of what happened in this movie with I Got Five on it. Is how can you take this pop song and just make it this kind of creepy background eerie texture with these bells, and
which is kind of like the foundation of vaporwave and
yes,
and things that like The Caretaker and things like that. But yeah, I think also it felt like how Kubrick used those old songs from the 40s and 20s in the soundtrack alongside orchestral music. Like you have that in this as well, and I think it was really effective. Like it felt, normally it can be very obvious, or the use of strings and classical music, especially now in music where, as you guys have spoken of before, like there's the score auteurs, and I think that it's a very fresh take of like classical music, I guess, or like reinterpretations, that it felt lively and interesting. I liked the use of drums that kind of felt similar to Johnny Greenwood's scoring in There'll Be Blood, with like that pop can. Like, and what's interesting, I think it was this movie, P.T. Anderson, because one of the guys who produced this movie, I don't know his name right now, but he also produced all of P.T. Anderson's movies, every single one of them. And at the end of the credits, he thanks P.T. Anderson, which was interesting. I don't know why specifically, or the connection. I didn't follow up and read on it, but it struck me as like inspired by Johnny Greenwood a little bit as well.
Interesting. I'm curious, a bit of a changing gears. When you guys watch movies, how much suspension of disbelief do you feel like you're prepared to give a movie? Obviously I watch a lot of genre movies, and they always ask you to suspend disbelief. Like, despite the number of, let's say, slasher movies that exist out there, almost all of them defy reality in some way. But I feel like this movie has a lot of conceits where you have to suspend your disbelief, sort of that are piled one on top of the other, and right up until the third act exposition dump, there are even more. But how do you guys come to that sort of thing when you view films?
So that's a really interesting question, and I never really posed it to myself. But as you were saying it, I was thinking, how do I do it? And there's two things that typically happen in a film that I watch because I have to live in these two worlds, right? One black and one white. So typically, if I'm watching a movie, which is the majority of the movies that I watch are predominantly white, only because that's the majority of film, you see something and you don't understand it, and you just say, that's white people shit. Like that's just things that white people do that I don't understand.
White people shit, like the hidden key.
Yeah, like that's white people shit. Like even Lupita did something that was like white people shit. Like, why are you getting out the car and talking to this little boy? Like, what are you doing? Like, you should be halfway home already. Wherever you're gonna go, you should have been on your way there.
I totally agree. It's so fucked up. It's like she becomes a Montessori school teacher all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's so out of keeping with her character that I was like, and then the second layer of that for me is like this quasi kind of, like, if I'm watching something that I know a black person does, but they probably shouldn't be doing, or at least shouldn't be showing white people that they do, it's kind of like, oh, you're making us all look bad. Like,
Right.
so it's like this weird thing. So if a black person is doing something that is what they're not supposed to be doing or not caring, like, you're just making us all look bad. And if a white person is doing it, it's like, this is white people shit. So that's kind of like, that's the way that I look at this suspend disbelief. Like, so in all of that weird Venn diagram, a black person like Lupita in this movie could be doing white people shit. That doesn't make any sense. So.
Right.
When I approach movies, it just depends on the context. Like if I'm watching like a trauma movie, I'm going to have a much different framework of viewing than watching like a Jordan Peele movie. And I tend to have a very easy time suspending disbelief if the tone isn't fucked with. And like, I think that's one of the reasons I have difficulty with Tyler Perry, because that's the thing he's, I guess, worse at. The worst at is tone and immersion, which is probably also why David Lynch is my favorite director. Like, I'm not very into adventure film. I just find adventure films boring, or just like essentially like movies that are primarily driven by plot, or just like narrative heavy and linear is obviously necessary, but I'm less interested often. Whereas in like a movie like Neon Demon, that's very polarizing, I very much enjoyed.
Yeah.
Because it leaves just, it creates space. Like I think in all forms of art, like there's certain frontiers, and I think like the final frontier in most art is like the form of like, I guess, texture. It's one of the reasons like Velvet Underground is one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
And it's one of the last things to be considered often. So when people pay it a lot of attention, and I think like in film, another word for that is often tone. It's something that I am very attracted to.
Yeah.
For me, it entirely depends on how many drugs I've consumed. Which I watched Us during a period of sobriety, but
Oh no.
I know, but it was amazing, like how many details I really locked onto in this movie. And I think you're right about like tone being so important. Like if all your movie has is narrative and plot, if there's holes in that shit, your movie's fucked. But if your movie's stylish, you can really forgive a lot for a really stylish movie.
Yeah, if this was a rom-com and had this many plot holes, I would not have gotten through it. But because this movie is so fucking stylish and there is so much complexity going on, these issues are far less concerning.
So I'm going to challenge you guys on something because I listened to your Forrest Gump podcast. And I love Forrest Gump, and that was all narrative and plot.
But it's
Yeah.
tight. That's my point. Is it super tight?
And I hate that movie. So
I fucking love it, man. There's no irony there in the love of that episode.
I love Forrest Gump. So
What's funny is in like trying to do like the false equivalency of our podcast. I'm like, yeah, I'm probably a little more Mark, and Boston probably a little more Chad. And here it is.
Well, from what I know, like from you guys, like I think that might track a little bit because I didn't grow up by any like financial means in the South, and I think that like that Black Jeopardy episode in SNL, I think that's the best
yes,
they've done in a long time because it's like
Oh, that's amazing.
it's kind of real, man. Like one of the reasons why like I really liked Get Out, and one of the things that's so smart about Get Out is like the type of racism, you see it differently depending on who you are. Like if you're like a West Coast person, you're like, oh my God, just racism broadly is terrible. And then if you're like me, you're like, no, it's specifically the brunch liberals racism, And then I can't speak for anybody else, but like, that's what's so cool about it. But I think you have these like cultural similarities if you're just not rich and you're from the South, because you're so mixed up there. Like you grow up around other people. You're not like walled off from other people.
Chad, and that's the beauty of William Faulkner, right?
Totally.
Like if you read Faulkner, that's what he gets right. Black people from the South in black, because I spent my summers in Alabama. My mom was from Alabama, from in Mobile, Alabama. We still go there quite, several times a year. And white people in the South have to live with Black people. Now, don't get me wrong, segregation exists, but they're intertwined in a way that's almost inseparable. Whereas you can live on the Upper West Side and have a TV show called Friends and never integrate with, never know any Black people in New York City. That is so possible.
Is that possible in New York, though? I feel like that's
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you live in Central Park or you live in Chelsea, the idea that you would have Black people around you is slim. You work in a high-end corporate job in New York City, there's not going to be very many Black people there. If they are, they're far and few in between. I know because I worked in a high-end corporate job in New York City, and I was often the only Black person there, and very often times didn't get invited out, or did my own thing after work, and this whole culture that I disappeared in my own culture and never integrated with theirs.
Goddamn Robert Moses.
So it wasn't necessarily because New Yorkers were outwardly racist. I think it's just people want to be with people that tend to look and sound like them and affirm their own worldview. And that's why it was so spot on when the dad in Get Out said he voted for Obama.
And he would have done it a third time.
Exactly. That's why it was so spot on, because that's exactly what it's like.
And people think that's like the past too. You know what I mean? Like that, like, oh, you did that one thing that one time, like you're fucking down now. Like it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. I started my college career, my first year of college. I went to a small historically Black college in Nashville, Tennessee, called Fisk University. And I had a job at Kinko's in downtown Nashville or whatever. But because and that's in the South, the store owner was a very nice white guy. And he loved me to death, invited me to his church, wanted to, hang out with me after, whatever. In the South, you could kind of find those people. A lot of those people, they're not all Trump supporters. Do you know what I mean? And they will embrace you in a way that it's more difficult from a very wealthy Wall Street, New York liberal. I don't think it's the same kind of embrace.
Well, I think a lot of liberalism imposes like a very moralistic position and frames their politics in this like ironically Christian morality that encourages them to shame people. And so it's not about whether they actually are friends with and fuck with black people and listen and, partake in things with them. It's more like a societal position piece that, they just virtue signal their way to the top.
If I can bend exactly this to the movie and an Easter egg within it, this is not inorganic, is the Hands Across America reference, which, was this thing that happened, and it was this very weird, empty gesture of performing concern for the underserved in America, where, the money barely got to where it was supposed to go.
I think none of it did.
Okay, maybe none of it then. Yeah, so I think that was a really interesting signifier for the liberal empty gesture.
Yeah.
And Gabe even calls it, this is some weird ass performance art shit.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And the first person to die in the movie is a homeless man.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny, coming up on Christmas, I just kind of got it in my head to go back and re-examine Do They Know It's Christmas and Live Aid and We Are the World. And it's a similar thing where that whole thing, that industry of benefit music may have actually served to harm the people it was trying to serve more than help. All that money, all that concern may have actually led more people to death camps than actually fed anyone.
I don't know if this is on purpose, but maybe that was the reason they wore red, to make fun of that campaign as well. I think that was Bono's campaign.
Brutal. Fuck that guy.
Yeah, I'm going to make a call and say that Hands Across America is white people shit.
That is definitely white people shit.
Think about all those those terrible songs, man. The thing that probably.
But We Are the World was black people shit. We Are the World, We Are the Children was definitely Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder. It was the who's of black people.
Yeah, and legit artists too. I mean, it wasn't a bunch of
Bob Dylan, I think.
Away.
Yeah, I mean, The Road to Hell, right?
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know that you don't need those early fish trying to get on land. You know what I mean? Is that kind of lay the groundwork for a few years later, somebody else picks up an NWA album, is oh, this is a similar theme in a weird way, and then boom. Although those albums are undeniably great. So I don't know. You can shit on all this stuff in hindsight. Maybe it did inspire something. I don't know.
Though, I was having a conversation with my wife earlier today about, I don't know if you guys know or an R&B artist named John Legend.
Yes.
Anyway, so at least when they were doing We Are the World, We Are the Children, they had a point and they wanted to raise money for something. I don't remember exactly what it was. But now it's just pure virtual signaling with no real intent to do anything other than virtual signal. And when I see people like John Legend who just want to be on the right side of every liberal cause, it seems even more vacuous now than it used to be.
For sure.
Yeah, it's a problem.
Well, it's also all these causes, man. When you're on the same side as every corporation and in every rich politician, it's how radical can your position really be? I mean, it's
exactly.
And then the other side of it, there's okay, well, if it's making progress for people, then maybe that's fine. But think about the people Malcolm X respected. He respected John Brown. He didn't respect Bob Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how radical? I mean, I guess you always need to be sort of radical.
Well, it's a hard line to toe now because everyone's screaming at the top of your lungs, and what gets lost is nuance, which is kind of where I think podcasting seems to be the sanity of the internet. I guess I'm patting myself on the back here, but it's one of the reasons I was inspired to make a podcast, is because it just felt like something worth contributing to. But
Well, I think one thing that's helpful in the podcast forum is that, in a way, it is a place to actually have conversations, and those conversations are not inundated directly and immediately by outrage.
Right.
They can be ultimately part of that conversation. There are certainly a lot of very virtue signaling podcasts. There's obviously a lot of podcasts about the issues, but you're actually able to like have a long conversation and work some shit out potentially. And there's not someone while you're trying to do so screaming at you about all the things you're failing to account for or signal towards.
I'm also going to say something though. There's a way that it can be done, at least in the mainstream. I think one of the most powerful advocates for criminal justice reform is Meek Mills. He does so much work behind the scenes that you just don't see.
Mm.
And if you listen to his music, you'd never know.
Championships was a great record, though.
It is. It is. And there are like other artists who are actually doing things behind the scenes that are actually making a difference, but they don't need to be loud about it. And that's how you know they're making a difference, because they're not on NBC The Voice telling you how great they are.
Mm-hmm.
If we can go back to the movie, but I've only seen this movie 2 times in preparation for the podcast. But the second time, I was always going back to and wondering about essentially like what is with the son.
Do you mean in the very final shot, or you mean overall?
Throughout the whole movie, but obviously like the final shot, if you weren't paying attention to it before, becomes quite obvious.
Right.
Part of me thinking, well, he has doppelganger blood in him, which, you know, so does the sister, but the sister seems to be a little less aware of it despite her furtiveness. But that kid, like, he realizes the mirroring thing really quickly.
He's also most comfortable under the stairs in a closet in the like playing by himself.
Yes. And like in that scene where the kid like cut open the gas tank and is then standing in front of the fire, he realizes that he's snapping his fingers because he's trying to create that magic trick.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's when the kid, I'll pull back, and he doesn't have the peripheral vision because he's wearing the mask. So that's how the mom nabs her. But he has this like sixth sense about it. And I was wondering if like, you know, the white twins notice it, and his sister's like, he just has trouble focusing. Like, what do you think was trying to be said there?
I have a problem with, let me rephrase that.
Your ass Mark, always with a problem.
Oh, God. Well, you know, I'm just so burdened with this like liberal brunch shit.
You are from Canada.
Yeah. I don't know how much this movie was trying to say a specific thing. In some ways it is, but you know, as I brought up at the very beginning of the podcast, Jordan Peele really introduced this notion of social horror, which I think is fantastic. But I don't know that his second film is a social horror, because I don't know that it is, because I think its object is a little too vague.
Right.
It confronts a lot of issues, but it demonstrates the mess of it all in so many ways. It couldn't be further from some sort of socialist realism statement about poverty in America or something like that, right? And so I feel like a lot of these things in the movie, like the son, it's a little unclear, and I don't know that there is a statement. I think there are interesting things going on with that character, but I don't know that something is specifically being said.
Well, like the mother seems to be more connected to him than the daughter.
Yes.
By like a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she just seems like a tween girl, you know. Dad's kind of goofy, daughter's kind of teen girl. The son is like this intense fucking kid, you know.
But you know what though? The daughter does have the highest kill count.
She's amazing.
She does.
Wait,
second.
Don't they all match at the end? Don't they all have 2 each?
No, because she runs the girl over, and then because they're like matched at 2, and then she runs the person over, and then they're at 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think I guess
The mom kills her doppelganger.
Yeah, so she's up, and then the boy kills his doppelganger. Yeah, I have to go check the tallies at the end. Dad at the bottom.
Having a teenage daughter, I can tell you that that's probably pretty normal. Teenage
Right.
girls tend to be very disconnected because they're in their own way, they're on their own head, and it's just a tough age for teenage girls and their parents. So the girl just kind of being on her own and being perceptive and not really connecting with the white teens in that way, I could totally see my own daughter being that way. Like, I don't necessarily know if that's anything other than
Right.
normalcy. I don't think that it would be any different if it was anybody else. I think if you're talking about the mom and the son, I would like to think that there was something more there, but I don't know if that's what Jordan Peele was going for. Obviously, what happens at the end, it builds more of a connection or disconnection, however you want to look at it, between the mom and the son. But I can't see, and I understand what you're saying, Jay. The scenes where he was able to control his doppelganger, maybe he figures something out, but it doesn't lead you there in any way. He disappears after that. I don't even know how he ends up there. It doesn't say. Like, he's just 1 second he's there and the next second he's gone.
Well, it's
So
what makes the second exposition so frustrating, because it's pretty clear that he has an explanation for everything when he wants to. So the absence of an explanation seems to be like it wasn't intended, or just, yeah, it makes it frustrating. I get what you're saying.
Do you guys take where he is left off, that he is giving mom a knowing look because he knows, or is it an exchange that they are both the tethered?
I think he knows, and because he's in the locker while she's Adelaide's doppelganger is giving this whole explanation. Like,
Yeah.
he's in the room listening to everything.
Right.
And then he sees his mom, like, the lady, her doppelganger was beat.
Yeah.
She could have just walked away and grabbed the kid and left, but she wanted to make sure that this woman that she stole a life from never comes back.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what he was recognizing.
Especially, I think he knows too, just because there's another strong, real knowing glance when she kills the twin that the sister didn't actually kill. There's a real hard look the son gives her, and I don't think it's because he's disturbed. He's already seen plenty of dead people at this point, so I don't think it was because it was a dead body.
So, probably unanswered question: what happens after they get in the ambulance and leave? Like, what's going on in that universe after that?
I mean, you see the helicopters, right? So I think like that revolution gets put down pretty quick.
Well, is it clear how many tethered there are down there? Is it a 1-to-1, or is there just a couple thousand under Santa Cruz?
Right, not explained.
Not explained.
But it
To
is
be hands across America, I think it was probably 1-to-1, because they're watching the news and then the people are coming out of nowhere in the news, killing the newscaster.
That's what I would think.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, the first, I forget who says it, but it's like, let's go to Mexico. So let's get the fuck out of America because this is American. So I think you're supposed to think it's not just Santa Cruz.
Right.
But probably just America.
Yes.
Right. Isn't this the movie Who Are You? We're Americans?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
That's pretty cute. I mean, like, that's being flip. That line sort of sums up the movie very effectively. That to me is exposition without being exposition,
I think it's
Yeah.
I think it's a great line though. I mean, because it's like even the lowliest of Americans is living fat from a global perspective off the backs of the global poor.
Yep.
Yeah. The shame of the exposition dumps that we're criticizing, because there were a lot of just great lines that kind of fill up already so much space. Like, I just love, like, they keep on asking, what do you want? And when she finally answers, it was pretty simple. She's like, we want to take our time. That line does a lot of fucking heavy lifting.
Yeah.
It's a shame they kind of flattened it a little bit.
Yeah.
Also, the Jeremiah reference, 11:11, which I don't know if you guys noticed, but I got really down a rabbit hole with that. Well, not rabbit hole, like at 11:11 is a mirror.
Yep.
And even in the digital clock, the colon is also 2 lines. That's another 11.
It's also the Black Flag logo. The Black Flag logo is 4
shit.
bars.
I read somebody writing about that. That's a stretch to me.
Nope.
That's funny
No,
though.
I think that's where it started, and I think it's so perfect. Like, it's a black flag. It's about revolution. It's about color. It's
Wow.
it's co-opted, and it's 4 bars. It's 4 black bars, like 11:11.
Wow.
And it's like, I will bring on them a disaster they cannot escape. Although they can cry out to me, I will not listen to them. I mean, that's the verse, and that's what the Lord has saith. So, like, pretty badass Old Testament shit right there. Oh, and the other interesting thing is, so I read that from, I have a New International Version Bible, and it gives you like subtitles for each chapter of each book. And the subtitle of that one is "The Covenant is Broken,"
Oh.
which
Okay.
yeah, I really liked that as well. Tethered, a lot of things.
Yeah. What else we got?
Why bunnies?
All the fucking Easter eggs, bro.
Yeah, right. Is it really a pun? Is it just left to be a pun?
I thought it was maybe a bit of a reference to Brer Rabbit, to those legends, and sort of a hat tip to the
What's
legacy
that?
of those stories.
What's that movie in Donnie Darko where all the bunnies die?
Watership Down?
Yeah. Is there any connection there?
Well,
Don't
I
know.
mean, maybe. I mean, like, it's like one evil rabbit warren smashing another rabbit warren. So I guess there's that. But what I was thinking about was like, rabbits are test subjects, and we get to enjoy shampoo that doesn't burn our eyes out because we pour it into the eyes of rabbits to make sure it's safe. So there's probably that experiment vibe there going on. And I went pretty deep looking for this one, and apparently Jordan Peele is just personally disturbed by rabbits because he thinks they are sociopaths, which is fair.
How are rabbits sociopaths?
Oh, dude, I had a girlfriend that had a rabbit. It's the worst fucking pet you can have. They just look at you with these little cold, dead eyes.
Wasn't one of the characters in Buffy afraid of bunnies? Oh yeah, what's her name? The demon who Xander dates. She's afraid of bunnies. And then she overcomes her fear by dressing as a bunny for Halloween one year.
I'm actually watching Buffy right now. It's funny.
It's the best.
This is a weird, like, one of my favorite people in the world, which is going to sound strange. I talk to Jay all the time about this, is Jordan Peterson. And he has
a lot to say right now.
Yeah, he has this quote where he talks about why nice guys finish last. And he uses the bunny or the rabbit. And he says, because the rabbit can do no harm, the rabbit is not a virtuous animal. The virtuous animal is the monster who chooses not to do harm. When I saw the bunnies, I thought of that. Like,
all right,
the moment that they decided to stand up for themselves, they started being virtuous in that way. But I don't know. I couldn't call it. Maybe it was just that the rabbits are sociopaths and Jordan Peele hates them. And that's what's so strange about this movie. Should I be reading more deeply into this? Or is he just giving me what he wants me to get? I know there are Easter eggs, but is it really deeper than what he's giving us?
Well, he certainly loves people doing what we're doing right now. And in all the interviews with him, like, he seems to get a lot of joy out of people picking up the clues he's left and then also coming up with new ideas. Like, there's a really fun video where he's like debunking Get Out theories.
Yeah.
And like, I think he's like a Gen X filmmaker, and he grew up with all this, like the first wave of really intertextual cinema. Like in olden days, people would like borrow ideas. For example, in Poltergeist, you literally have Star Wars toys flying around, and that's that era cinema. And it seems to be what he loves, and I can just respect doing a thing you love.
That makes sense.
Did anyone see the owl as a Twin Peaks nod in the Quest ride? It gets smashed upon second visit. But,
yeah, I didn't even think of that.
That I really, I mean, this is such a small thing, but it might be fun tangent. That owl, for some reason, as soon as I saw it, I thought, this is like that Snow White ride in Disney. Now, I've heard this ride still exists in Disneyland on your side of the continent, but in Disney World in Florida, they had a Snow White ride, and like you eventually go into this woodsy area, very similar to the one in this movie, and it's horrifying. Like I have like visions of it, like still, and I've been Disney World like forever, and it's similar, like those sunken in eyes, and just like the focus on faces and these like bright lights, and it's also like, like Chad, I know that you suggested watching a few things, and one of them was Mirror Image and the Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone's like one of my absolute favorites, and one of the things that I think Twilight Zone specializes in terms of its contribution to horror and just scaring the shit out of me as a kid is its focus on the face, which this movie does so good. Like particularly Elizabeth Moss, her acting is like tremendous face acting when she sees her doppelganger husband die, and she's like at first it's horror, like she's like horrified by it, and then she's like relieved because this piece of shit and this like awful marriage that they have, she's finally done with, and that laugh at the end is like petrifying, really, and it's so disturbing. And it's a similar thing, like in Mirror Image, the faces they show like are like still scary. Like I watched it again upon your suggestion. It's like it was like 1 a.m. I'm watching it in the basement. All the lights are off. It was perfect. You're so taken by it, and then all the doppelganger faces, especially Red. It's it's great.
Yeah, it's such a treat that those are on Netflix right now. I've been watching a couple of them every few days, and there's so many of them. Not all of them are like home runs, but so many of them are just really cool. And it's kind of a bummer that like Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone is not that great.
I haven't seen it because that's all I've heard. I guess, yeah.
It's it's just it's totally mediocre. And I think it's one of those things like when somebody gets really popular and they start making a bunch of shit, like David Lynch talks about it in Lynch on Lynch, that one of the reasons why the second season of Twin Peaks isn't as strong is he was just off doing Wild at Heart. So
yeah,
it's probably just, I don't know. I mean, I've watched 2 or 3 episodes of it and just didn't feel any desire to keep watching it.
Well, and also I feel that Black Mirror is our Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Totally agree. It's up to date. It's cool. It's smart. It has a look that like when people 40 years from now watch that, they'll think it is like the time now.
And sorry, interesting side note on Twilight Zone in Boston. If we can find the tapes of this, I want to cover it. But are you guys aware that Rod Serling had a Western that he did prior to doing the Twilight Zone?
No, a TV show or a movie?
Oh, it was a TV show.
Show. I did hear that.
It only ran 6 episodes or something like that. And it directly confronted race. Like I think the first episode like had a lynching in it. And, Rod Serling, along with like people like Patty Chayefsky and Gore Vidal, all ran very left and were on the right side of history in this circumstance. And it got canceled because it was just hated. And so he made the Twilight Zone as like a cover to address social issues.
Wow.
Which actually goes to what this, I actually didn't think it was going to tie into anything, but it actually connects to one of the origins of horror movies. It's kind of like a, what do you call that thing? It's a Trojan horse to talk about socio-political issues often. I mean, a lot of the Romero's after his zombie films after the first one were definitely trying to do that. But he used Twilight Zone. Like if you watch him in press conferences at the beginning of like trying to when Twilight Zone was coming out, he's like, it's just a silly show with some science fiction, like like downplaying all of its social commentary so people wouldn't like hate it.
Yeah, there were some real radicals in Hollywood, man. Like during that time, like I read Billie Holiday's biography pretty recently, and she talks about like this awesome scene with Clark Gable. Like she, her car broke down or something, and then this guy pulls up and helps her and her friend, who are both black, down the road, and he's like, "Hey, let's go get a drink at this country club," and he takes them to this whites only country club, and he's Clark Gable, and he was basically the Brad Pitt of his time. He could do whatever the fuck he wants, and somebody had said some shit and he punched him the fuck out in the country club. Like, so there have been some real ones in Hollywood, over the years, and I think they've got their ideas in, you know.
You know what's fascinating? I finished an article in the Atlantic today about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And apparently, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was a cover for coming out as gay.
What?
Like his dad hated him. Like if you go back and you actually watch the movie, the dad hated him, disowned him, kicked him out because he was different. And like he has to go, he goes like through the wilderness and almost gets eaten by the abominable snowman. And then finally, when he's needed, he's accepted into Santa's. But his dad is Prancer, and his dad's like, I don't like the nose. Hopefully he changes, he grows out of it. And he never does. And he kicks him out.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's dark. It's a very dark film. Do you know what I mean? Like,
It's similar to Ugly Duckling. It's like The Outcast.
yeah, the outcast, but even like weirder, like because Santa's quite dark. Santa's like, well, I hope he changes. I hope he doesn't have to look like this. That way he can work for us. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole thing is just strange.
Love that. I'll check it out.
Well, I love Christmas, as you all know, so I'm delighted to read it.
I liked, another movie nod, how Vision Quest, which had the Native American, was changed to Merlin's Forest. Yeah, bit of the times they are changing. I like that was a nice, quick one.
Yeah, I love that. Like, despite the rebrand, it's still a hell pit.
Yeah.
I did love the Chud reference, but Chud is not a good movie.
Mark.
Chud is not a good movie. Oh, well.
I know it's not lesbian vampirism.
So little even tries to rise
But you
that
said you
high.
like the soundtrack. It's got a cool, like...
The soundtrack to Chud is fucking fantastic. It's by the OMD guys, and it's perfect, like FM synthesis horror. It's great.
Yeah.
I watched Chud and I like anticipated your conversation on it. Because it starts off like really strong and it falls apart at the end, but I really did enjoy it. I'm a big Daniel Stern fan, and there's not a lot of Daniel Stern opportunity. So I was happy to have that, and I kind of like that the guy from Home Alone's in it. What's the Chud reference though in Us? I didn't recognize.
Oh, it's just in that first shot that's of the TV, there's a VHS copy of Chud sitting right next to the television.
Yeah, there's Chud.
That's right.
There's Goonies and The Man with Two Brains, the Steve Martin movie, which is excellent. And I hadn't remembered. I totally forgot about it. And it is a very funny movie.
Man with Two Brains is my second favorite, next to The Jerk of Steve Martin.
Yeah, I think I might go with that. Well, actually, number one for me is Leap of Faith, which I just love and no one's seen because it was not very liked at the time. And then it's The Jerk for me.
Gotcha. Nice.
But oddly enough, like my wife, who grew up hot and is therefore not interested in nerd shit, does not fucking care about
that does not track, Chad. I don't. It makes no sense to me.
She was just like a popular kid, so she didn't have to like obsess over this dumb shit like I did. Like
because you were so homely as a child.
Dude, I lived like Boo Radley as a kid. Like I lived as a shut-in, like for real. But like, Chud is her favorite horror movie of the 80s. Like she fucking loves it. Like it's just super weird that's the one for her.
Wow.
And it's not the choice I would have gone with for sure. But
it's kind of like a Toxic Avenger.
Yeah, basically the monster is really similar. That like when it was made, somebody was like, okay, cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers, and they were like, all right, write the script up this weekend. We'll shoot it on Tuesday. Like that.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Last quick question. Does anybody think that these people that the doppelgangers had feelings, or like it. I didn't know if they were supposed to be like animals that had humanistic qualities or humans that had animal. Like I couldn't tell if they had like, because like you would kill one of them and they would like one of their other family members and they would just be smiling and just have no emotion about it.
Yeah.
Like I was curious to know if anybody had any ideas about what these people actually did and felt.
I sort of viewed it as that it was not entirely clear whether or not they were not entirely human or if they have been systematically so dehumanized that they're just operating in a completely different way.
That's
You
kind
know?
of how I thought. Like it was kind of a nature versus nurture thing. Like, you know, left on the ground, they're basically animals, but you take them up and give them ballet lessons and they can fit in pretty okay.
Mm, that makes sense.
Yeah. Like Adelaide is the example that it can be overcome. Yeah.
Well, in the whole, I mean, unfortunately, we now have the explanation of they do share a soul, so they're like part and parcel, but have just been left to rot like a detached limb.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Where do you guys think Jordan Peele goes from here? You know, because I was thinking about
That's a good question.
I was suffering through Lovecraft Country for you guys, and you know, it opens with that Jackie Robinson thing, and I was thinking with Jordan Peele, there's a little bit of that Jackie Robinson effect with him. Like he has to fucking bring it. He doesn't get to have Dune, you know, like or I'm sure he will eventually, but it's like he has to always be on. And there's so many expectations on his movies that must be just like a real heavy burden, especially when you consider like I kind of agree with Chappelle's sort of critique that like Key and Peele is just doing his show, you know, and so you wonder like if Chappelle did horror, what we would get, you know.
I guess that's really interesting. Jesus, but I feel that Chappelle's being a little butthurt about that. And I'm like
totally
one of the biggest Chappelle fans, especially his last, what is it, 6 stand-ups now? Jesus. But no, I think that like I really enjoy Key and Peele's show.
I love
and
it too. But it's not nearly as brave. Like there's no racial draft in Key and Peele. You know what I mean?
That is true. But
Dave Chappelle wasn't the first to do that either.
Oh,
I mean, you had it Live in Color, which is the long time precursor. But that's what I watched when I was a kid, that dealt with very provocative racial issues, but also did it in sketch comedy. You know, like, I don't think that's a fair statement. I do think, though, that Jordan Peele was able, like, even within, like, because there were some really dark Key and Peele episodes. And you can see where Jordan Peele is kind of like, now that I used to Get Out and Us. I mean, he's doing Candyman now, which I'm excited to see.
Can't wait.
Well, he's not directing. He's only the producer.
Oh,
I thought he was directing.
No.
That is a bummer. And you're right. Like, I mean, the expectations on him are high. I don't know that Us, I mean, it's like 93% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes for what that's worth. I don't know if that's if that was really a home run. Maybe that was just a double, you know? So he's kind of lowered the expectations a bit with Us. And I don't know, it's complex to see where he goes, but if he just does another Us type thing, I think he'll be all right.
I definitely think he's going to do something that he's passionate about. And I think that a decade or two beyond now, Us will kind of be like relegated to this, like to the Criterion, you know, where it's like this interesting failure. Because I agree with all of these criticisms that we're putting upon Us, but it really didn't take away my enjoyment of it. And it's probably a movie I'm going to own and rewatch. So there's that. But this didn't hurt him, I don't think. And he still has a lot of power and he's created a lot of space. You know, I think he's created enough space right now. I want to see him kind of immerse himself in a new project.
Yeah. I think what his legacy will be is I think that he will have a lot of like director children. Because he talked about that, about how like seeing Whoopi Goldberg accept her Academy Award was was a really moving and important moment for him. And I think like when he's in front of kids, he's saying like, "Hey, you don't have to go around about it anymore. If you want to direct films, just go direct films." I'm really hoping that he's able to continue to inspire young, interesting filmmakers.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I hope so too. But the thing that I love about the whole Jordan Peele, however it ends, I think what it will say is, as a Black person, he could fail this way with a really creative, out of the box idea that didn't fail because it didn't appeal to enough Black people. And I think that's a really important thing. Like, I love the way that my criticisms of us have nothing to do with race. And that's oftentimes how African American film, outside of somebody like Steve McQueen, it's difficult to get a Black filmmaker to do something outside of race that can include Black people, but doesn't make race at the forefront. And if he fails, it won't be because he was virtue signaling, or he was going too far with race, or race was even a part of it. It's just because, hey, this time this movie by Jordan Peele didn't work out, and it's perfectly fine, and he'll get money to make another one after this one.
Yeah, totally. He's doing like I don't know if you ever saw that rant that Snoop Dogg did about like why does every movie have to be a fucking slave movie?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jordan Peele is really fulfilling that vision of what can be offered. I was listening to this really cool YouTube talk about Islam and Dune, like the movie. Like, so there's like all these like Muslim references all over Dune. It's like, to me, it's a really interesting, relatively unexplored thing, even though it's like super obvious. But they got into talking about Ender's Game, and in Ender's Game, there's a character that just happens to be Muslim, and it's not ever mentioned, or nobody cares. It doesn't affect the plot in any way. It's just there. And I think that's like when you start seeing like really interesting things happen, where like the characters are simply allowed to be singular things. They don't have to be the representation of every single person. And like the Jackie Robinson analogy, like he was the only player, and now you have the Negro League recognized by the MLB. I think you see this progress, and it's for creativity and fans of wild shit. I think it's awesome.
I think so too.
Yeah, and I mean, Jordan Peele gave a fuck ton of space to the Black nerd.
Yes.
And dude, his Gremlins 2 writing room skit is the fucking greatest thing ever. Like, it's my favorite thing he's ever done.
My favorite sketch is still, I don't forget if it was Lil Wayne specifically or not, but when the rapper actually goes to prison and how horrifying it is. I love that sketch.
I feel like there's like a Key and Peele skit on YouTube that I haven't seen like every few days, and they have like I'm like, are they still making them? Like I feel like I saw all of them, and then I always see like a new one that's just super bizarre. The thing I really like them is how bizarre they are. Like the Terry's sketch, like the terrorist dude.
Amazing.
Like what the fuck is going on with that? It's so good. Like the facial hair is just so off-putting and bizarre.
They brought a lot of cinematography to sketch comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind of like Kids in the Hall did.
Right.
Yeah, and like specifically like 80s cinematography, which I happen to really love.
Right.
So Chad, I have to ask, do you have any weird questions for us?
So I think like we were talking about this earlier, and if you had to have Tyler Perry do a classic horror movie, like a real deal horror movie, which one would you pick and why?
Like to remake one?
Yeah, like Tyler Perry gets the rights and he's like, I think I can fucking nail this. Produced by Jordan Peele, but directed by Tyler Perry.
I have no reason why this came to my head, but the first thing that came to my head was Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds.
Ah.
Wow.
I'm going to say something that's slightly out of the box, because I thought it was a horror film, but most people wouldn't. The Passion of the Christ.
Whoa.
Oh, that is really good. That
Damn.
But I think he would do his God's honest best to nail The Passion of the Christ.
God,
and it would like be really bad in really great ways.
Exactly.
Wow.
I don't know that I can top that, but I was gonna go with The Exorcist.
Oh, that's good too.
Because this is the thing, like, Tyler Perry, not to go back to Tyler Perry, but he's tried like his hand. Like he has a recent Netflix movie, and I can tell you that like most Black people, not all, but most Black people have seen probably 90% of Tyler Perry films. He's in a place where he's just complicated. I don't know. I don't want to go bring it back too far back to Tyler Perry, but he could probably ruin any movie. So I wouldn't be as surprised at all.
Well, it's interesting though, because like the complication that is Tyler Perry is like that of the Black experience and that of America and all this stuff. Because like Chad and Mark, listening to your Veronica episode, which I loved, was like the discussion of the outsider artist. There's a really great book that kind of talks about outsider musicians called Songs in the Key of Z.
Yeah.
And they have a bit on Wesley Willis. It's written by a guy from one of the best radio stations ever. If you haven't checked it out, WFMU from Jersey proud. But talking about Wesley Willis, like Wesley Willis is almost like interesting. Like Tyler Perry is just like a much more successful Wesley Willis. He makes he constantly puts stuff out, and he's prolific and he has an audience and a following, and it's very sincere, but it's not necessarily good, but there's a lot to appreciate and enjoy, and he creates these spaces, and his tenacity is inspiring as hell.
Yeah.
So
what have we learned?
Did you answer, Mark? I don't think you answered.
Oh, fuck.
I'm not letting you know.
Let's go into the outro, Chad. Hereditary?
wow.
Just like, this family drama, this family that's unfurling from within because of this incredibly non-Christian practice. It's like unfurling the family unit.
I mean, do you have Medea in that or no?
Fuck yes.
I mean, I definitely have Medea in Tyler Perry's The Exorcist.
Yes.
Wow.
That's a different movie.
Yeah.
That sounds really good. Passion of the Christ, you win though.
Passion of the Christ is just the best.
Yeah, especially if it has like if he does the whole like really sexy black actor, like Black Jesus thing, I think it would be fucking
Black
great.
Jesus thing.
Yeah, I mean, how do you beat that? Like, you can't.
Because there's like, I don't know if you guys, obviously I'm from Boston and I read the Boston Globe, and around Halloween, they always have like the 100 scariest movies. And Chad, you may have seen this being from the South. There was this documentary called Jesus Camp.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
And that made the top 100 scariest movies. It's those Christian movies that don't mean to be scary, but that are terrifying, that I think Tyler Perry wins. I think that he'd do it. So that's why I thought about it.
Y'all made a really good point in your Tyler Perry episode about how discordant some of his cuts are. Like how it goes from like in Diary of a Mad Black Woman, it goes from like just chopping it up in Medea to like a fucking face slap beatdown. Like in no time. I mean, and and I was thinking about that. I thought so much about that point you guys made, and it made me wonder if it's like, does that sort of weird discordant thing ever, like some young filmmaker in New York goes, there's something about that, the way they did with the weird close-up ear shots, like in Ed Wood's movies, like, does that become a thing that somebody one day, like, pulls out and extrapolates?
Boston, you can follow this, but like, it is very, as Boston kind of told me, it's like very indicative of the Black experience. There's so much trauma, it's to find the time.
It is. And Tyler Perry, that's one of the things that resonates with Black people, a lot of Black people, about Tyler Perry. It is really poorly done, but accurate. Like, this is an example. I was watching this TV show on Lifetime with my wife, and it was called 24 to Life, right? And it's about like the last 24 hours before you go to prison and you have to say goodbye to your family and what that's all like. But it's like real, like it's a documentary thing. And it's two white people that are going to jail. And the whole time we're like, are these white people really breaking down like this because somebody's going to jail for 2 years? Like, that is so regular. Like in the Black, like we all know somebody who's in jail. Like if you were going to jail and you were telling your family members that you were going to jail, they'd be like, all right, this is what you need to do. This is who you need to know. And this is where, like, the trauma is so regular if you're Black. I was reading an article, it's called The Untouchables in the Rolling Stone, about how the Chicago PD over the last 3 decades have paid $90 million to Black families because they're offing Black people like it's nothing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so you have this whole prison industrial complex, you have poverty, you have like all these things going on, and it's just normal. You walk around with it and it's just normal. You know, and that's what Tyler Perry does well. Like he captivates like well, like just the ordinary trauma of being Black. And it's not like every day being Black is like the sad thing. And that's what he also he does well, like the church being the center of the Black community. You know, you go there, you can sing, you can have fun. And then in between all of these traumas, there are jokes. But he just does it poorly. But it is kind of indicative of what it's like sometimes to just be Black.
Interesting, like you mentioned that documentary, like and then Spike Lee did a movie like that, but Ed Norton is the lead that goes to jail. You know, was it 25th Hour?
Yeah, 25th Hour. Yeah,
25th Hour. You know, and there's this like most of the time you don't even get the explanations. You don't get to say goodbye to your family. The police pick you up and you just never come home. At least they get the 24 hours. That's what we were thinking. You know, like it's hard for a filmmaker to really encapsulate what it's like. And I think it's best done in pieces, you know, where it doesn't, like Moonlight is a really good example of that, where it's really well done. In our conversations, Jay and I conversations about this, it's really complicated because we're like, I get sick and tired of doing like the dark Black movie, which is why I love Us and Jordan Peele so much, because this is just a middle class Black family being normal. Like outside of all of the trappings that they probably, if it's real, they probably have somebody that they know that's in poverty and somebody that's in jail and somebody that died by the, you know, some ridiculous thing. But they get to leave that behind and just be in a movie. And that's part of why I like Us. Just, you know, tie it all back in.
Yep. I'm going to give it a thumbs up.
Right on.
Well, I think that's all I have.
Yeah.
That's all my notes here.
That's all I have.
yeah, pretty much.
Excellent. Well, Boston Jay, thank you so much for joining us. That was fantastic. Do you want to tell us, Race Trader, what do you guys have coming up?
Our next episode is going to be Moonlight,
Great.
followed by Fences. And this hasn't been done yet, but I'm very excited about it because we put out one every 2 weeks and we're trying to keep to a pretty strict schedule with that. And in February, we decided to do White History Month. We're giving
So funny.
we're giving white people the shortest month of the year.
So good.
And even before that, though, we want, because of the inauguration coming up, we're going to cover one of my personally favorite movies. Boston, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I'm so excited to talk about it. We will be covering Network.
Oh, that's a
Oh,
good one.
wow.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm excited.
Are y'all going to do Malcolm X ever?
Yes.
So that movie, because that movie is so long and complicated and great, that I felt like we needed more time and Jay feels the same way, as podcasters, to be able to, like, we're still very new to it, you know, and it's such a good movie. Like, that's one of my personal favorites.
I watched it last week. Like I've seen it 50 times easy.
So good.
And Denzel in that is so amazing. And the thing about that movie is it inspired like people, the whole wearing the X thing. And I know there's some argument that there was some of it before, but it really sparks a whole genre of fashion and posters in the Black community. So it's something that I felt like, and Jay also felt this way, that we should take a little bit more time before we get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just listened to y'all's Training Day episode yesterday.
How'd you? What'd you think?
I found myself often being like, I wish I could be in this conversation right now because I agree with so much of it.
Well, dude, no, I mean, listen, I would like the same compliment back to you. The feeling's mutual, my dude.
Yeah, like for me, it's a little harder, not because your podcast isn't great, but just because I haven't seen a lot of the movies.
Yeah.
But I loved, like I said, the Forrest Gump one was one of my favorites. I liked the Medea one that you did, and there was another one that I really, really liked.
Your
It's not
fucking
coming up.
Facebook episode, holy shit.
Yeah, the Facebook was great. Like you
I
guys
gotta
have
get
a
you into
lot of.
black metal, Boston. We gotta listen to
You don't need to get into black metal.
You should
No,
totally
come on,
you should get into black metal.
I think I could get it.
That's a difficult thing.
It's gonna be through Blue Toss Nord, don't worry.
That's great. Great place to start.
Yeah.
Does anybody really need black metal? I mean, it's sort of like Fela Kuti for Viking wannabes. I mean, it's like I mean,
That's funny.
I don't know.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, just because it's funny doesn't mean it's true.
It's
I don't. We're doing this episode about dungeon synth coming up, and I just could not fucking get on board, man. Like,
So excited. Talk about white people shit. Oh my God.
that is some white people shit, for sure. I appreciate it though.
it's terrible.
Totally. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. And everybody out there, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for having us.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Anytime.